afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Standing Committee on the Economy. I'm Colleen Young, and I will be chairing the Economy Committee meetings this evening. We have sitting in for Jennifer Bowles, Alina Young, committee members Ryan Domitar, David Buckingham in for Ken Francis, Delbert Kirsch, Alana Ross, and Ken Cheveldayoff in for Doug Steele. Today we will be considering the estimates for the Ministry of Energy and Resources, followed by Bill number 128. After the bill, we will recess for 15 minutes and then return to consider the estimates for the Ministry of Environment. We will now consider the estimates for the Ministry of Energy and Resources, and we will begin with Vote 23, Energy and Resources, Central Management and Services, Subvote ER01. Minister Ryder is here with his officials, and as usual, I ask that officials please state their names before speaking at the microphone and their titles. And Hansard will turn on the mics for you if you need to just raise your hand. Minister, you can begin by introducing your officials that have joined you here today and begin with your opening remarks.
Thanks, Madam Chair. We're pleased to be here to discuss the 23-24 Ministry of Energy and Resources budget. Joining me today at the front table, I have Deputy Ministers Susanna Laxon and Craig. Behind me is my Chief of Staff, Charles Reed. Also, Assistant Deputy Ministers Corey Hughes, Charla Hordenchuk, and Scott Kistner. From the Ministry's Financial Services team is Kim Olowski, Executive Director of Communications, Natasha Lipinski. Acting Executive Director of Energy Policy is Bruce Wilhelm, and Directors Brad Wagner and Scott Weaver. The Ministry of Energy and Resources develops, coordinates, and implements policies and programs to promote the growth and responsible development of the province's natural resource industries. The Ministry is the primary regulator for the life cycle activities of the oil and gas industry and associated mineral resources, and ensures competitive royalty systems, regulations, and policies for all natural resource sectors. As a primary regulator of the oil and gas sector, the Ministry of Energy and Resources takes its role very seriously, a regulatory role that is built upon the principles of integrity, competency, and transparency. The Ministry is proud that the province's regulatory framework is recognized for its competence in ensuring oil and gas operations are conducted in a safe and secure manner. The Ministry also plays an important role in promoting Saskatchewan's diverse resource potential to investors around the world. Saskatchewan's diverse and abundant natural resources support substantial mining, forestry, and oil and gas sectors. In the last several years, the resource sector has begun to diversify into areas like lithium, copper, zinc, hydrogen, helium, and an array of critical minerals, along with increased production for potash and uranium. The resource sector is the workhorse of the Saskatchewan economy. Together, oil and gas, mining, and forestry account for over 25% of the province's GDP and directly employ more than 20,000 people. Last year, minerals alone had $19.5 billion worth of sales, with another record year for potash. For 2022, the value of oil and natural gas production was approximately $17 billion. Forestry sales also remain strong, with $1.7 billion of products sold in 22. Our province's growing resource sector is truly fueling growth that works for everyone. All major potash companies have committed to increasing production. Nutrien will be ramping up annual potash production capacity to 18 million tons by 26. This represents an increase of more than 5 million tons, or 40%, compared to 2020 levels, and will lead to approximately 350 new jobs in the province. K+S Potash announced plans to increase production to 4 million tons per year over the next few decades at its Bethune facility. K+S is looking to hire more than 100 additional employees over the longer term as new systems are established. Mosaic is also taking action to increase its annual potash operating capacity by a further 1.5 million tons by the second half of 23 at its new Esterhazy K3 operation in Kalonze mine. Since resuming production at Kalonze in 21, Mosaic has added 150 jobs. And BHP is accelerating the time frame for the construction of its $12 billion Jansen project. Several other companies have new potash mine projects at varying stages of development. Saskatchewan is Canada's leader in critical mineral production and potential. We have occurrences of 23 out of 31 critical minerals. Critical mineral exploration and development is anticipated to be a key economic driver for Saskatchewan over the next 10 years. To fully capitalize on this opportunity, on March 27th, we announced Saskatchewan's critical mineral strategy. The strategy outlines 4 new goals for the sector: increase Saskatchewan's share of Canadian mineral exploration to 15% by 2030, double the number of critical minerals produced in Saskatchewan by 2030, grow Saskatchewan production of potash, uranium, and helium, and establish Saskatchewan as a rare earth element hub. To drive these goals in this year's budget, the Government of Saskatchewan has committed $4 million annually to expand the targeted mineral exploration incentive to include exploration drilling for all hard rock minerals across the province, and increase the funding limit to support emerging commodities. The Saskatchewan Mineral Exploration Tax Credit has also been increased from 10 to 30%. The increased tax credit will improve the investment competitiveness of Saskatchewan's mineral exploration sector. Additionally, a total of $2.4 million in new funding will be invested in geoscience data management, technology, and automation, bringing the total investment in this area to over $4.4 million. This additional funding will continue to improve the information provided to explorers and stakeholders, giving them more confidence and more accurate information to make sound investment decisions in Saskatchewan. External clients will also be able to fulfill regulatory requirements by submitting mineral assessment reports online. The advancements in current production in this space provides a glimpse of the true potential of critical mineral development in Saskatchewan. I'd like to share some success stories, and I'll start with our uranium sector. Saskatchewan is home to the world's highest grade uranium mines and leads as Canada's sole producer of uranium. Last year's sales were more than $900 million. After announcing plans earlier in 2022 to restart operations at its McArthur River Mine and Key Lake Mill facilities, in November, Cameco announced that the first pounds of uranium ore had been mined, then milled and packaged for distribution. The mine and mill currently employ approximately 830 people, more than half are from northern Saskatchewan, and Cameco is planning on additional hiring for the sites forward as they continue to ramp up production. Also in February of this year, Cameco announced that it has signed an agreement with Ukraine's state-owned nuclear energy utility to supply Ukraine with uranium and meet its full nuclear needs through 2035. Moving on to copper and zinc, Foran Mining Corporation announced the grand opening of its Saskatoon office, which is responsible for the development of its McIlvenna Bay project, set to be the world's first carbon-neutral copper-zinc mine. Released in 2021, our government launched the Helium Action Plan from Exploration to Exports, which outlines how Saskatchewan aims to become a world leader in helium production and export over the next decade. Additionally, helium valuation reporting through the Petronex system will bring the helium sector into alignment with existing reporting for oil valuation already in place for the oil sector. At present, there are more than 1,000 helium permits and leases for exploration and production across the province. There are currently 15 active helium wells producing in the province and an additional 16 helium wells drilled this year. In 22, helium production in Saskatchewan was approximately 2.4 million cubic meters, roughly 1.5% of global production. To complement the ever-increasing production of helium, we have provided $140,000 in funding to complete a helium liquefaction hub study to provide information needed to develop a commercial-scale, value-added, export-oriented helium sector in the province. Now I'd like to touch on some of the successes in the oil and gas sector. I'm pleased to share that our province's oil production levels have returned to 90% of pre-pandemic levels. The industry is increasingly investing in carbon capture, utilization and storage, and enhanced oil recovery technology, resulting in more than 40 million tons of carbon dioxide sequestered and over 100 million barrels of incremental oil production. Saskatchewan sequesters half of the CO2 that is sequestered in Canada. And leading environmentalists agree that Canada cannot meet our climate targets without CCUS and EOR. The Made in Saskatchewan oil and gas emissions management regulations have been a success, achieving a 60% reduction in reported venting and flaring at upstream oil field facilities from 2015 levels. The Ministry of Energy and Resources, in partnership with the Saskatchewan Research Council and the federal government, recently wrapped up the accelerated site closure program at the end of the 22-23 fiscal year. Over 8,800 inactive oil and gas wells and facilities in Saskatchewan were capped or closed under the $400 million program. This work would not have been possible without the dedication of Saskatchewan's oil and gas producers and service sector companies, who stepped up to get the work done within a relatively short time frame. Program funding went to more than 900 Saskatchewan-based oil and gas service companies and supported an estimated 2,500 jobs over the life of the program. That includes about 1,790 jobs directly in the oil and gas sector. Additionally, over $90 million of program funds were spent in support of Indigenous participation. Over $32 million was used for projects on reserve lands, and eligible Indigenous service companies completed over $59 million in site closure work under the program. A collaboration with the Saskatchewan First Nations Natural Resource Centre of Excellence helped to drive the success. The work has remediated and reclaimed lands across the province, including on reserve lands, and many former oil and gas sites will be returned to their natural state or previous use. And the cleanup of inactive oil and gas infrastructure and sites will continue. Just as the program comes to an end, the inactive liability reduction program will begin under the newly introduced financial security and site closure regulations. This will set annual spend targets for oil and gas licensees for the retirement and closure of inactive and uneconomic oil and gas infrastructure and sites. Also, there is a slight budget increase of approximately $110,000 to help with the implementation of the new programs under the regulations. And finally, in the forestry sector, after coming off an all-time high of $1.8 billion in forest product sales, we're continuing to move ahead with our growth plan goal to double the size of the forestry sector by 2030. We're currently at 80% of this goal and expecting over $1 billion in new forestry sector investments by 2024. In closing, the Ministry of Energy and Resources budget is strategically built to meet growth plan objectives in all sectors of natural resource development and production by increasing production in and diversifying the critical minerals and mining sector, continuing to support innovation and technological development in the oil and gas sector, increasing the value of the forestry industry, and growing Indigenous participation in Saskatchewan's natural resource industries. And finally, continuing to use technology and automation to provide a better experience for our clients at the ministry level and to give our explorers the most up-to-date and accurate information available, combined with an efficient regulatory system so they can have confidence to invest in Saskatchewan. Thank you, Madam Chair, and we'd be happy to take any questions now.
Thank you, Minister. I'll open the floor to questions from committee members at this point in time, and I'll recognize Ms. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Minister and officials. Here tonight, everybody who's present, as well as all of those who I know have put in a lot of work in preparing for the budget and also for estimates this evening. I'm sure watching at home, riveted. Looking forward to tonight, and Minister, I promise one day we will do this without having to have a child present for estimates, so thank you for being gracious about it. I guess maybe let's start with vote 23. It's kind of some basic overview questions. Why is this vote down 75.6%?
So the vast amount of that, 112 million, the accelerated site closure program, that was the amount that was spent last year. The total, and of course the program, as I mentioned, the opening comments is wrapped up. And the reason, that was a $400 million program, but it was a multi-year. So the 112 was in the final year.
Thank you, Minister. And you said the vast majority. Was there anything else in that variance besides the accelerated site closure program?
Item you were looking at, it was 53.2 million to 161. So that, I'm just saying there'd be some small amounts both ways, I would think, in that, but that's essentially the answer.
Looking again through some of the votes, can you offer some comment on why the central management salaries are down and whether there's been any restructuring in the ministry or any variance in FTEs and reassignments?
Some changes between different line items. I'm going to ask my deputy minister to speak to that.
Susanna Laaksonen, correct, Deputy Minister of Energy and Resources. There has been some shifts between, we have moved some little functions between the divisions, and then the ministries of ICT, TED, and ER used to have joint corporate services, and those were kind of repatriated back to the individual ministries. So there's been shifts in some of our numbers because of that, and that's why, for example, the central services looks a little bit different, although central services budget has gone a little bit up, not down. In terms of the question regarding the FTEs, we have in this fiscal year's budget 3 new FTEs. 2 FTEs were added to the Energy Regulations Division. Those are there to implement the financial security and site closure regulations, as that ministry referenced in his opening remarks. and 1 FTE was added to the Resource Development Division for critical minerals work.
Thank you. And the variance in the resource development spending on goods and services.
In terms of Resource Development Division's budget, the divisional budget includes one non-expense item. The liability that is booked for the remediation of Gunner Mine shows in that division's budget. But because it was a liability and that liability was fully booked in the last fiscal year, it doesn't show up anymore in this year, but it doesn't mean that the money is not there. It's just the accounting rules change and they required it to be booked on that way. And so then the other changes are, relatively minor. For example, there is the 1 FTE there, as well as then that counts for the increase to enhance the targeted mineral exploration incentive.
Thank you, Deputy Minister, for the answer. Can you tell me how much the ministry spent on advertising and marketing in the past year? And forgive me, I wasn't clear if you consider those two separately or if you consider them the same. Okay, thanks.
go?
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry, it took us a while. While the corporate services function was broken apart, Ted and us still share the marketing function because there is a number of benefits managing it as a one instead of breaking it apart. So the number actually shows up still in the budget, but it's 367,000, and that is the marketing advertisement, that budget. I do not have the details right now.
Just from reviewing last year's Hansard, that's a very, very small increase
Yes.
over last year. And, recognizing that's not a material amount of money in the context of the work of the ministry, but I'm curious if any of that represents a strategic direction from the ministry, as you set out to build this year's budget, and you look at the important role that your ministry plays, if continuing to promote the work of the ministry and the sector it serves throughout Saskatchewan is represented in that increase.
I would describe it this way. There's sort of the more obvious things included in there, promotional things, and that booths at trade fairs, those sorts of things. But there's stuff that I do as minister, my deputy does, other officials do, that I would describe it as promotion, but isn't included in there. If I go speak at a conference, I did today at the Williston Basin one, I did an armchair sort of discussion thing at lunch hour. There's a lot of things that are kind of ingrained into all the officials in the ministry. There's of course the regulatory function, but on the promotional side, there's a lot that the ministry does for promotion that wouldn't be captured in that small amount.
So then, circling back to some of your comments off the top about, I believe you said oil has returned to about 90% of pre-pandemic levels. Minister, do you anticipate that, and is the ministry planning for it to return to pre-pandemic levels, or see if there's an increase in production expected or planned for? Do you have a projection you're able to share?
I'll just start now, but then I'll turn to the officials and see if we can get you some estimates or something. We certainly hope so. We anticipate that happening. As it continues to recover sort of from the pandemic situation. As you mentioned, in the opening comments, it said at 90%. We think it's important that we do. With the issues in that industry right now, it was clear with the terrible geopolitical situation in the world today that if the world needs oil, it's going to need it for some time. And what better than here, a jurisdiction that cares about the environment has made huge strides in technology. I look at enhanced oil recovery, CCUS, that if the rest of the oil in the world was produced the way it was in Saskatchewan, emissions would drop overnight. So certainly we're optimistic it will. As I've talked to different companies, it looks like many of them are anticipating ramping up their drilling. So we're going to do whatever we can to encourage that. I'm just going to see now if we have some estimates. I'm not sure, but I'll check with officials. Corey Hughes, our ADM, he's got some stats for you.
Corey Hughes for the record. So yeah, we're anticipate consistent growth. We're returning to, right now we're forecasting return to pre-pandemic levels of around that 500,000 barrels per day in fiscal year 25-26.
As new critic for my elucidation, is that typically how you'll track growth in the sectors by average barrels per day by a certain point in time in the ministry?
We report annually on the annual in millions, but internally we talk about barrels per day, and that's what we forecast.
And what are those numbers for this year?
Sorry.
I have a 2022 number. In 2022, Saskatchewan produced approximately 165.6 million barrels of oil, which would then correspond to approximately 454,000 barrels per day.
Thank you. And those are the figures that you took into consideration for this year's budget.
That is a number we know, and then based on all the different conditions and so on, we'll make our forecast.
And in looking at the measures that your ministry sets out, is there consistency in whether you set your growth targets based on the value of a product or the volume produced?
In terms of, like, for example, growth plan targets, some of our volume-based, some of our value-based, so it depends a little bit on the commodity where we are. But when we look at the work we do every day and how we follow markets, how we prepare forecasts, we look at both because both has its own value and they are different types of indicators. So we both make look at the volume, but also then, of course, as you know, recently, for example, oil prices have been extremely volatile. So it is also important then, of course, track the value and understand where the value is going to settle.
And I assume there's active participation in setting the targets for growth that your ministry is working towards. Was there a rationale in regards to why some would have been, some you're choosing to measure based on production volume and some are based on value?
I think it's fair to say internally, the ministry folks, they use both. They use volume, they use value, depending on the circumstance, either or both. In terms of communication, though, I think frequently what it's used is what people are most familiar with. For example, in oil, barrels per day is pretty standard. It's used frequently. In potash, for example, I would say tons, not so much. So people are more inclined to want to know dollar values. So it's frankly, it's sort of frequently a case of using both.
Thanks. And last question, kind of down this rather arcane line. In establishing your targets and your outcomes as a ministry for meeting Saskatchewan's targets in the plan for growth, do you have the time period available from which point you started measuring and when you anticipate what the end point is?
Sorry for the delay. So What had happened, I believe the announcement was done in 2020 with the end date to be 2030. I think it was 30 goals for 2030. And the delay was because while it was announced in 2020, the baselines used would be somewhat previous. So we're just having discussions about 18, 19. So in the instances of not wanting to eat up a bunch of your time, if it's okay, we'll follow up with you with that in writing with the breakdown, because I think different industries, depending on numbers available, might have used different baseline.
That'd be much appreciated, thank you. In terms of, I believe last year there were about just over 21,000 inspections of pipelines, wells, and facilities. Do you have the number available for this year?
So we're just checking, I think you said 21,000. So you were referring just to the wells, or were you referring to all inspections?
I'm not sure, I scribbled down that number after reviewing last year's Hansard.
I think that was the wells. So I'm just going to get Charlotte to run through the inspection report for you, if that's okay.
Charlotte Hordenchuk. So in 22-23, we had a total of 24,887 inspections. Just to break that down by type of facility or type of infrastructure, we had for well sites, we conducted 23,794 inspections. We did inspections at 359 facilities. We did inspections of 214 times at licensed pipelines, and then other inspections at rigs or measurement totaled 520, and that's how we get to the 24,887 inspections.
Thank you, and of those, how many were satisfactory?
So based on our information, satisfactory inspections totaled 18,212.
And of those that were outstanding or unsatisfactory, how many had serious issues?
So in terms of the number of inspections and what we find as satisfactory or unsatisfactory, our top inspection issues, and I can give you the counts on each one, but in regards to significance, I will just explain the type of issue and we can go from there. So our highest count of top inspection issue is around well identification sign is illegible or incorrect, and we had over 2,500 of those. We had about 1,100 issues related to failure to construct or maintain an adequate lease dike. We had over 1,100 inspection issues relating to inadequate weed control. And then going down from there, less and less surface casing vent wouldn't meet specifications, inadequate housekeeping, failure to clean up or properly dispose of spilled material, and so forth. So in terms of significant issues, those would be the top 10.
And sorry, is that, I assume that's going in order of least significant to most significant?
So this order is going in terms of the count, so highest count to lowest count.
So then what would be the category with the highest, and I assume you have some sort of risk register or something that you use to prioritize?
Yeah, so in terms of the count, the highest count of inspection issues is related to signage.
And in terms of severity?
In terms of severity, I don't have that calculation in front of me. I have the counts in the inspection orders, inspection issue.
Okay, so in terms of the way that the ministry does counts, it's based on frequency, not necessarily significance or severity.
So in response to the question on inspections and the activity that's happening on the ground, when we talk about severity, it's based on situational concerns. So for example, I had read out kind of the top 10 inspection issues. So not in the top 10 would be H2S or odor complaints, but those in terms of severity would be at the very top. And so those are responded to immediately and addressed because of their impacts to the public.
Is there then a comprehensive list available? I'm just like publicly available on, I don't know if it'd be Iris or.
Yeah, all of the inspections and land locations, details of the issue are all public, and it's all listed on our website and updated regularly.
And forgive me if I'm misremembering again, I recall last year there was some discussion of perhaps like a new IT program or management that was being explored to look at increasing, I think, the ability of the public to access or navigate some of these things. Am I remembering that accurately?
Here last year, so
Okay, neither was I.
Well, I was here last year, and I do remember this question. So in regards to publicly available information, and what we were talking about was around the Petronex public data page. So for example, and this is all on our website, there's public data portal page on Petronex, includes data sets around volumetrics, business associates, well, facility license information, and general well and facility information. So that public launch of the Petronex information was what we were referring to last year at this time.
And I did find the number for last year for inspections, and it was, I believe, 21,030, with 19, just shy of 20,000 of those happening for well sites. So is the increase in inspections, is that due to an increased rate of inspection, or is that due to increase, like, is there an increase in active wells year over year?
So with regards to our well site inspections, last year we did report 21,733. This year our numbers indicate 23,794. When we look at, our inspections over a 5-year comparison, we of course did see a dip down in 2020-21 due to COVID-related matters. And now, with the increased activity on the landscape, we are seeing, more field visits, more well site inspections related to the, increased in the sector overall.
Thank you. And year over year, does the ministry track how many inactive wells would have been put back into production?
So Brad Wagner. And so there's 3 types of wells that we generally track over each year, and they're the number of inactive wells and the number of active wells, as well as the number of abandoned wells. And So I'll just take a few minutes just to sort of clarify the differences between those, just so there's a clear understanding about what they are, as they're often confused. We also track orphan wells is another one that I should mention. So we talk about an orphan well and an abandoned well. They sound as though they might be the same thing, but they're, very, very different. An orphan well is one in which the operator has ceased to exist due to typically bankruptcy, or they've walked away and they cannot be located. Whereas an abandoned well is actually it's a good thing. The terminology doesn't sound like it is, but it's a good thing. It's a well that's been plugged downhole, cemented off. The casing has been cut below grade with a cap welded on the top of it, and it's been rendered in a safe and environmentally sound condition. So just to make clear, those are the differences between orphan wells and abandoned wells. And then, as I mentioned, we also track inactive wells and active wells, and those are more or less what they sound like. Inactive well is not yet abandoned, but it may or may not still be capable of production. And then active wells are just like they sound, actively producing. So those are the sort of the four types of wells that we actively track.
Thank you for that reminder of the distinction between the different classes wells. Do you have a count for the number of each in the province this past year?
Yeah, so the well counts that we have as of March 2023, so abandoned wells, we have 47,093. Actively reporting, we have 49,541. Inactive wells, we have 35,329. And then orphan wells, we have 2,769.
That was 2,769.
Yeah.
So on the orphan wells in particular, I guess a few questions. Does the ministry have the number that have been cleaned up to date?
Yeah, it's right there. Yeah, so in terms of orphan wells that have been cleaned up, we have a count of 790.
So in last year's committee discussion, the minister said that there had been about 700 wells at that point, which had been cleaned up, and then on the books, there were 499, which I took to mean that was the number outstanding. So does the significant difference between 500 and the number just provided represent a significant increase in the number of orphan wells identified by the ministry year over year? Or in last year's Hansard. Yeah, on the right-hand side, just towards the bottom.
So it does look like last year we had stated at one point that there were about 499 orphan wells remaining at that point in time. And so the significant increase that we have seen is due to insolvency of a company by the name of Abbey, they contributed about 2,300 orphan wells themselves into the orphan well hopper. I'll just mention as well too, I guess it's important to note that the orphan fund is of course fully funded and paid for by the oil and gas industry.
Absolutely, I'm familiar. So what's the current value of security deposits from companies?
Yeah, sorry about the delay there. Yeah, in terms of security deposits, we have $71.8 million.
Thank you, and again, I'd note that's a significant discrepancy from the figure reported last year. Is there an explanation?
Yeah, well, I mean, so firstly, the amount of security that we have at any given time varies tremendously, depending on the situation companies are in and whether they owe security or not. So you have to recognize month over month, it does vary significantly. But, the primary difference here between those two numbers, I think, is we had a $27.7 million security deposit on account for Abbey, which, of course, they're in bankruptcy, and so their security deposit has been forfeited into the orphan fund, so it doesn't count as a security deposit any longer.
Forgive me, this is all new to me. The fluctuations that you mentioned month to month that are fairly significant. So let me know if I'm on the right track. The orphan well fund is, of course, distinct from the security deposits paid by the companies. And the security deposits that are paid by energy companies are essentially transactional. They go in and out of some sort of ministry account based on the liabilities or assets of that company active in the province.
Yeah.
Okay. Glad I'm somewhat grasping the concept here. So when you say there's significant variance month to month, can you help me understand what that variance looks like? Are we talking about like $5 million, or are we talking about the $100 million variance from this year to last year?
A lot of the fluctuations are, for example, related to the sales of assets and mergers and acquisitions, because without going to the whole explanation of the financial side and security regulations and the various components of that, there is the liability rating essentially that is calculated, and that calculation defines how large the deposit has to be. Now, if a large company in a very solid financial position based on these calculations, for example, purchases assets, it doesn't necessarily have to keep as large deposit in. If company in, I would say in layman's language, lower rated company purchases those assets, sometimes the liability that is required can go up significantly, maybe $10 million, $20 million. So depending on the activity, the mergers and acquisitions, sales asset activity, and as those liability calculations are then constantly updated, it requires different size deposit. It doesn't take anything away from the integrity of the system or the amount that we are holding. It is how the system is built, but that is what causes then those fluctuations.
Okay, I'm not sure I appreciate the nuance there, which is likely my lack of understanding of a complex issue. But again, in terms of, I guess let me reframe this. There's a significant variance of from $170 million to $70 million this year. Is that noteworthy for the minute? Like, is that uncommon? I'm just trying to get a grasp of when you talk about fluctuations, is $100 million like a pretty normal fluctuation, or?
Let me try again. And so the fluctuations, it could be even $100 million sometimes, depending on the activity. And so we wouldn't be concerned, and it doesn't increase the risk. Essentially, you could think about it this way. One of our multi-billion-dollar producers has the wherewithal to have the cash flow and the reserves to pay if something happens. Whereas there are companies who are not in as fortunate financial position. And for those situations, we do these calculations and we essentially assess the risk. And we always want to make sure that there's a sufficient security deposits to cover those situations. So depending essentially who owns exactly what assets, the actual amount of security is different, but the risk is still managed.
And is the value of those deposits collected established by the ministry? Okay. So then maybe, I guess, different question then, similar vein. What's the total value of the Orphan Well Fund this year?
Yeah, the current balance is around $7 million.
$7 million.
Yeah.
And so the $27.7 million that would have been forfeited by Abbey Resources in this case, that money moves from the security deposit into the Orphan Well Fund?
Yeah, so good distinction there. The 7 is net of that deposit.
Okay. And then what's the average cost? I imagine it's different from type of well to setting to all of those things. What's the average cost that the ministry would use to calculate for each orphaned well? So we were having this conversation around, we've got like an RESP for my daughter, and setting one up for my son now, and I was like, yeah, you shouldn't set up an RESP, but like put the money away, and then if they want to start a business and we buy a house, that money's there, versus like I paid for my own school, and it was hard, like I worked the whole time, I had student loans, but I took 5 classes every semester and I graduated on time while working 20 hours a week, and even though I loved being in school, I always belabored things. Had that been the option, I was so sick. Maybe we shouldn't tie all our money up and just,
I think he liked beer.
I mean, yeah,
You know what, he's actually gonna have to go to work for 8 o'clock in the morning.
that changes things. I went to school out east, so I grew up in Ottawa, so I had a misspent youth in Montreal, which is a good place to be a young person.
So you find Regina's very small.
It's funny, so I used to think Ottawa was a small town, right? Because I lived in Toronto, next to Montreal. This place is so small. And genuinely, I find Regina's kind of the right size. Like I grew up in a small town outside of Ottawa. Like by Saskatchewan, so there's 5,000 people. And Regina's just kind of like a big small town to me in some ways. I know it's significantly larger than like the community I grew up in, but I recognize people. I'm thankful I didn't grow up here because I'd see ex-boyfriends all the time, which I don't have to worry about all the time. Yeah, it's I think it's Saskatchewan's got some like uniquely sized municipalities, which I think is actually like genuinely really special compared to.
Metropolitan.
Well, God, Ottawa's huge now. Like, I haven't lived there in 15 years, but it's crazy, just the sprawl and like the small town I grew up in was like a gas station, hardware store, grocery, like small grocery store. Now there's like a Nordic spa, there's a ski hill, like my friends get stuck in traffic, so it's an hour on the weekend.
So Brad and Charla are they're doing some quick calculating on the cost per well for you, but I'm just gonna get Kim, to clarify something that Brad had said about that Abbey fund, the dollar amount.
Kim Oleowski. Just want to clarify the fund. So currently there's, at March 31st, there's approximately $7 million sitting in the orphan fund. The $71 million we were talking about earlier in security deposit, it doesn't belong to the fund at this point. So that money is sitting in a liability, if you will. At some point, it either is going to be forfeited to the fund or refunded back to the client that paid the deposit.
Understood that, and I guess really what I'm looking, kind of like the direction of my questions are more so, Abby's just one example, obviously, of a company that's become insolvent, but given the commitments that have been made around, and I believe the real desire to see every orphan well, forgive me, I don't know what the language that you'd use, dealt with, processed, for lack of a better word, eliminating that legacy backlog of orphan wells, which is now increased. Is there an adequate amount of money in the fund to ensure that will still occur with no taxpayer dollars?
I grew up in Humboldt, so it's 5,000. But I'm so similar. When I moved to Turtleford, that was my first RN, well, second. And my plan was to be there for 2 years. And that was what, almost 30 years.
I lived here for, supposed to be like 6 months a year as we studied for my LSATs and see if things worked out with this guy. Maybe he'd follow me, whatever big city I went to school in. Although I was going to apply in Saskatoon, and yeah, that was 13 years ago, so.
When I did find my wife there.
You found your wife in Turtleford?
No, she already came with me.
Oh,
So that's not what
So you brought her with you?
With me, the community grew up, the community that we were at before was called, a place called Siemens.
Yeah, one of my old bosses is from Siemens.
Well, if you weren't born and raised there, you weren't supposed to be there. That was the attitude I brought.
Okay.
Was not very welcoming. And then we moved to Turtleford, and I mean, I wasn't there a day, and freaking people were coming in the arm office, introducing themselves, inviting me and my wife over for supper. I was going, this is nothing like Siemens.
It's funny, my old boss, it's like 10 years ago, but he and a bunch of his friends who left to go to school in the city, and they all started buying up the old houses in Siemens that were vacant, so that they still own the whole campus. So I wonder, I don't know anything about it, but hearing what you said, they use them as hunting lodges and stuff now.
We used to vacant teachers because my wife worked for school.
So if I could, I guess there's some variance, right, depending on the type of well and the amount of work that needs to be done. Officials are telling me that it can vary anywhere from $20,000 to $70,000 per well. So, you know, if you want an average, you take somewhere in the middle there, I suppose. I would point out, though, to your point, I absolutely get your point, and I'm going to get Susanna to follow up with some information from the parliamentary budget officer. But the important thing to remember, it was similar to a question that I asked a number of months ago, is that to do a total cleanup, I'll put it that way, it would be a multi-year project. And so in those years, there's still the ability to continue to levy industry for any extra dollars that are needed. So I'm going to ask Susanna to speak to, I think, a fairly recent report from the parliamentary budget officer. What's that?
Yeah,
Budget
correct,
officer.
correct. So they did a study on this. It was published in January 2022. It was called Estimated Cost of Cleaning Canada's Orphan Oil and Gas Facility Wells. And so they did, one of the components they looked at on this report was security on hand. And in the table 4.2 of the report, they report that the security in hand in Saskatchewan is based on their estimation is 171 million, and they estimated cleanup is 181 million. So they conclude that according to current projections, Saskatchewan has sufficient security on hand.
And this is from January 2022.
That's correct.
Right, which kind of at a high level followed the Abbey insolvency, but not as closely as I imagine people on that side of the table. That report would predate?
It would absolutely predate that, but while that is large in number of wells that got orphaned as the Orphan Well Fund, those wells, as they get cleaned over time, there is no ability to clean everything in a 1 year. So the industries continue to get levied to continue to replenish the Orphan Well Fund. And for example, currently as his role as a director of liability management, Brad annually sends that memo to the industry, and then different amounts are collected, and I think it is more than the 7 million that we are going to be collecting for the current fiscal year.
So then looking, the Orphan Well Fund, I believe, was introduced in 2010. And based on the numbers from last year's, that were provided in last year's estimates, they're basically about 50 to 60 wells per year are cleaned up. Is that a fair assessment?
I think, yeah, in some years, other years, it's been, more like 80 to 100, 120. So,
120 is the high water mark, and
yeah, with our current capacity, yeah.
so then looking at the significant influx, due to that insolvency, are there plans within the ministry to increase increase the number that they're seeking to clean up every year, or is this simply, is the legacy backlog now just, I guess 4 times larger, and thus the tail extends?
So with regards to the inventory of the orphan well volume that we're facing, we are, absolutely looking at options on how we could address that inventory in a meaningful way. There's a few things we have to consider though as well, the capacity of the service sector to do that work. And, that's the time frame that the work can be done, the locations of the wells and different approaches that, might be taken with regards to where the contractor is working in certain parts of the province and different techniques. And then also in consideration of, the procurement practices that we follow and how we can get multi-year agreements with service providers. So all of those things are taken into account, but we are definitely looking and exploring ways to perhaps do the work differently. And we did make reference to that in our business plan that was released on budget day for the ministry.
Are there timelines on when some of those plans might solidify?
That wasn't the minister, that was his chief of staff.
So regarding timelines, I would just say this, it's a work in progress. I think over the coming year, we'll do some exploring about those options and, there might be further understanding of the capacity that can be undertaken by the service sector, as well as the availability of, the contractors and the procurement and all of that. I would also just add that in relation to our growing inventory, we've heard earlier today mention of the Abbey receivership. I think we're, very closely monitoring and watching the receivership asset sale to see what sale amounts will look like and what inventory might be kind of, repurposed and put back into production. So that volume that's been put in, we're counting in the orphan inventory will change based on the Abbey receivership.
Thank you. That was going to be one of my follow-up questions. In terms of the value of the risk for the orphan wells right now on the books for the province, do you have that number available? Deputy Minister, you used the PBO number of, I think it was 181 million as of January 2022, which I wouldn't have the number of orphan wells currently or at that point in time for the province, but would be likely around 500.
I can just clarify, when the deputy gave the number, I think you thought it was 181 million? It's 81 million. Yeah.
Okay, pardon me.
Yeah, the parliamentary budget report is 81.
Pardon me, yeah, thank you, I misheard that.
Yeah. I think officials are kind of filling me in here, so it was 81, not 181. And they're saying that the Abbey wells were natural gas wells, not oil wells, which I'm also told now are quite a bit cheaper to clean up than oil.
So hearing that, which sounds like good news, is there a value that the ministry has, or does the ministry?
Total value on the cost for the current orphaned wells? That's, just give us a second. One of you do.
So we have with us here our number for the expenditures for current inventory of orphan wells and facilities. And so in order for us to have dollars for the well and facility abandonment and reclamation, it would be about abandonment costs for the remaining 2,769 orphan wells, and the 52 orphan facilities is $48.7 million, and reclamation costs for remaining the orphan well size and orphan facility size would be 69.7 million. So altogether, we estimate the required expenditures to be 118.5 million.
Thank you. And when you use the term expenditures, I'm but a simple new critic to this file and trying to wrap my head around it. That total number you quoted, the 48 plus the 69 million, that's essentially how much would need to be spent to remediate, clean up, close the book on all of the orphan wells currently identified by the ministry.
Abandon them and do the reclamation required.
So then hearing what's been said about Abby potentially going through receivership, somebody else purchasing some of their assets, hypothetically, should another company elect to buy those assets, do they have to buy all of them, or is there a risk that some of the less desirable ones could be left on the ministry's books? Essentially, what I'm trying to figure out is like what's the risk to the ministry that, you know, next year you folks are still going to be sitting with a backlog of, I don't know, pick your imaginary number, 2,000 wells to deal with, and a significant gap between the value of the fund, which I think was quoted at about 7 million right now, and that. No, correct me if I'm misspeaking. I'm not.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
Well, no, not so much with reclamation. I mean, they put the permit or whatever they are, but those SAGD plants were big when I left. But they had, like when the well prices really dropped, they shut in a lot of wells. Yeah. And some of them didn't start back up because it just wasn't feasible.
So it's still just not economic to run.
Yeah, but the well is still there, so the farmer's still getting paid the lease, and hopefully the RM's still getting paid their taxes. I know I got a friend that's got a farm, and I help him with spring wells. He's got a couple oil wells there that they've had for 50 years and shut in. They're just sitting there abandoned, and they're still paying them. Really? But I talked to one oil company, and he said, well, the reason they do that is because technology has changed so much that they're hoping for them to reclose the well and then get back and redrill is more expensive because you're paying the lease. Yeah. Because again, the taxes are pretty full.
So. Yeah, I'm like not even close to something. I don't really know what I'm talking about, but something folks in the industry always said to me is times when there was a bit of a downturn in prices, those were actually, I mean, terrible in some ways, but opportunities for innovation for like some of those newer technologies and things to actually really start to move more into the field when things kick back up again.
Well, I know when talking to one guy, you know, like he kind of indicated that back in the day, you know, like there'd be a big technology change maybe once in 25 years, but as time moves on, it's being more rapid, maybe once every 5 years, where there's or even shorter depending on. I know somebody was working on trying to make those heavy oil wells that were shut in into like mini SAGDs, try to come up with some kind of plan. I don't know if that would ever happen, or if that would ever work. that's still kind of the same,
But it's still
oil?
drawing, yes, it keeps the pressure on. But it's not.
Wow, so in school, lots of those things go up and down.
Well, you can still see them, but no, in the last 2 years, they haven't put in the first term.
Because up our way where the heavy oil is, you don't have any of those controls directional. All you see is a little thing going around and around and around.
So that's what I'm saying. Does it change the landscape? The landscape, so it's a lot more.
I can't remember the numbers, but when we used to pitch the government like 10 years ago around like unlocking its potential in some of the heavy oil, it was like, something crazy, like $1 billion for every 1% that you could unlock. Just all the heavy oil up through your way, that's still there. Just because it's not feasible.
Well, those traditional wells, industry told me they were only capturing between 12 and 13% of the actual well down there. But those SAGD plants, they're capturing more like 75 to 80%.
And do you know how they, because again, I'm like, this is kind of my reintroduction to this, but like, when I left, they were really doing some exploration work, just like this, like, really looking at merging that with like some of the VAPEX stuff, so not just using steam, but using like solvents like propane and butane and this, you know, the same way we kind of replace water flooding with like CO2 flooding, they were looking at replacing kind of traditional steam with pick your solvent, and some people were looking at using CO2, just to, I guess, you know, further increase that production in some of those wells.
So the new state PCR to capture more of the CO2 and put that
Capturing right at the well.
caverns. In caverns everywhere.
That was very controversial.
Get us one for next year. So understanding, you know, your point, your question, I get what you're saying. So what officials are telling me is, so there's 7 million in that fund currently. The security deposit total fund is 71.8 for a total of 78.8. But there's also being levied on industry another $10 million this year. And then the ministry has the option of changing that, right? They could increase it in subsequent years. Sorry, you had several questions in there. I don't want to miss any of them. You had asked about the receivership and whether they can buy some or they have to buy all. Officials are telling me that they have the opportunity to buy some, not necessarily all, which of course would lower the number of wells in the orphan well program. But again, it doesn't really impact the risk to taxpayers because it would impact the risk to industry because the intent is that industry will pay for this.
Thank you, Minister. I really appreciate it. And I guess final question on this line. It remains the priority and the intent of the ministry to ensure that taxpayer dollars don't go into having to clean up orphan wells.
Yes, it's industry funded. The intent is for it to remain that way.
Thank you so much. I'd like to ask some questions about the incentive programs, if that's a suitable change of pace. So forgive me if this is publicly reported and I just don't know where to look for it, but going through the ministry's incentive programs, can you identify how much money has been dispensed of through each of the ministries. God, I've got a list of them. I'm thinking of, like the oil and gas processing incentive.
Those-
There's,
yeah.
there's the water flooding.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I have a chart officials provided for me that I'll just walk through each of them quickly. So the three programs, it's the oil and gas processing investment incentive, but there's two components to that. There's the oil, gas, helium, and lithium section, and then a chemical fertilizer section. And then there's the Saskatchewan Petroleum Innovation Incentive. We refer to it as SPI as the acronym. And then the Oil Infrastructure Investment Program. And so on the OGPI, or the oil and gas processing, there's, on the oil, gas, and helium section, and lithium, sorry, there's 300 million that's been approved as credits in the regulations. There's 20.4 million of that has been earmarked through contracts, and there's 116 million for conditionally approved projects. So that leaves a balance, again, because these are multi-year, that leaves a balance of 163.5 million. On the chemical fertilizer part, the total credits and regulations are 70 million, and there's been 50 million approved 50 million for conditionally approved projects, which leaves a balance credits remaining of 20 million. On SPI, the Saskatchewan Petroleum Innovation Incentive, the total credits and regs were 30 million. Earmarked through contract is 13.1, and credits for conditionally approved projects are 14 million. So that leaves credits still remaining of 2.9 million. And the Oil Infrastructure Investment Program had total credits and regulations of 100 million. Earmarked for contracts is 24.3, and credits for conditionally approved projects is 75.6. So that leaves $100,000 there.
Thank you, Minister. And when you refer to the money left, that's the amount of money left over that could theoretically be directed towards projects in this year?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
right, yeah.
Great, thanks. For, it's OGPI, sorry, I'm not used to it, feels silly to say, for OGPI,
Enough acronyms.
of the projects approved or conditionally approved, my understanding is those can be value added for processing, methane capture, carbon capture and storage, utilization and storage, EOR. How many of those projects are for CCS or CCUS? And then I'll have the same question again for EOR.
Sorry for the delay. So the problem with the delay is it's not automatically tracked that way. So they're kind of going through each one. And I don't want to delay this, but I also don't want to inadvertently give you the wrong number. So if we could, we'd follow up with that. And also, I think you said your next question is going to be the same question, only on enhanced oil recovery. So it would be the same. If you're okay with that, we'll follow up with CCUS projects and EOR projects.
Very welcome. Thank you, Minister. And I guess maybe just a philosophical question on this one, or a strategic question. So, last year, the former minister had indicated that, any public money emerging from the ministry would follow private money, and that was the kind of the guiding philosophy and principle in supporting innovation development of resources. And I'm legitimately wondering, like, looking at the changing environment, and both with the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the changes that we're seeing in Alberta, is there changing philosophy in the ministry in terms of how public dollars can be spent to incentivize some of these really innovative areas that Saskatchewan has traditionally led in? Thinking specifically of, I guess, to my previous question, EOR and CCUS. Those are areas where we've traditionally had with EOR, I guess, like a 30-year history of real innovation. Is there any changing in philosophy in the ministry, and I'll hold my second question.
Interesting question, very good question. So I would say as of right now, there's no change in strategy that way. We're planning on doing a review this fiscal year on all the programs, though, because some of them are getting, close to winding down. We'll have to decide where we go from here. Your comment about the Inflation Reduction Act in the States is bang on. We're in a situation where a province on its own can never compete with that. So we'd obviously have to have federal government support. I've had some discussions on the IRA with Minister Wilkinson, my federal counterpart. The federal government has made some moves on CCUS on that side. They haven't on EOR, which I think, and I've advocated for that. I think it's important they do. So I think kind of to get to the crux of your question is we're going to be reviewing this, decide what this looks like going forward. But at the same time, we're going to be discussing with the federal government because the Inflation Reduction Act, obviously, I'm sure you've heard in the media, the federal government, I'm paraphrasing, but they've essentially said, they don't have unlimited money, so they're going to have to pick and choose what they're going to target to be competitive in. So obviously, we'll be lobbying them for what we think they should pick and choose.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Specific question in terms of when is that review expected to start, and is there a projected completion date?
So I should clarify, when I talked about a review, it's an internal ministry review. Officials will look at it. It's not a statutory review or anything like that. And then there'll be some recommendations on how we move forward. They'll be doing that work this fiscal year, and it's expected it'll be done by the end of the current fiscal year.
So any significant changes should they be recommended and approved, we would anticipate for next fiscal?
Oh, yeah, like this fiscal period, it'll be the programs I walked through with you, yeah.
So again, maybe one more general question on this. You know, again, to the point that you're making to the federal government around the IRA and ensuring that obviously Saskatchewan projects are getting full consideration, and we can ensure that the opportunities that we have in this province are ones that we can push forward. Is there any concern on behalf of the ministry or the government, thinking specifically around CCUS and looking at some of the activity in Alberta and the opportunities that their government is pursuing there? In regards to CCUS, you know, again, this is an area where we've kind of had a 15-year head start in some ways, but there hasn't been a great deal of action since then.
In terms of the comparison between Alberta and Saskatchewan, I would say that we certainly share the significant interest of seeking these opportunities and see CCUS and EOR as key pathways moving forward. Whether it's going to look identical or not, probably not exactly. We have a different geology here, different opportunities from that geological perspective. We also have a little bit of a different industry, and both in terms of size and the opportunities, for example, the oil sands production creates for Alberta. So it won't look identical. For example, just looking at those two different differentiators. But certainly, as I said, we are very, very keen on seeing those types of projects to move forward.
Is there any concern that any of that expertise or advantage that Saskatchewan has might be looking to flee to Alberta, where there seems to be more capital flowing at the moment?
So I don't know if that's so much, I wouldn't voice it as a concern. So we have industry here that's going to be looking to capture CO2, and we have a great deal of knowledge here already. You know, we talked about the CCS Knowledge Center a second ago with officials, and PTRC, the Petroleum Technology Research Center. They played a big role in the Williston Basin Conference that's going on right now. There's a lot of knowledge there. So I think the future for it in Saskatchewan is pretty positive.
Thanks, Minister. It was a great conference. I was there briefly this morning, but I missed your lunchtime address. And you mentioned the CCUS Knowledge Center, and that's kind of been in the back of my mind. You know, I saw obviously the funding announcement coming out of Minister Savage's office in Alberta, and is there any anticipation of comparable support or anything like that coming out of the government of Saskatchewan to ensure that, you know, centers of excellence like that stay here, they don't move west?
So there was, you know, you mentioned the Alberta funding, which is really good news, right? I think it speaks to the expertise that's here, and it's not just within the province that it's relied on. There's been, SAS Power has done some funding with them in the past, so no sort of imminent news release or anything, if that's what you're asking, but you know, certainly we're pleased to have them here, and again, I think that Alberta funding just sort of speaks to the kind of esteem that that organization holds in this industry, and so I think that's good news. They're centered here in Saskatchewan.
So I believe the original funding for that came through BHP, if I recall correctly. I'm seeing some nods. BHP, yeah.
It's a major funder, that's
Yeah.
right.
So going forward, looking at the center in particular, were there any funding emerging to support it? Would it would likely be through either SAS Power Industry?
And as you mentioned, BHP Industry does help to fund, so you know, I'm not sure in the hypothetical, it would depend probably what the approach would be, but SAS Power has funded in the past, yes.
Great, thanks. Slightly changing gears, Minister, you mentioned, you know, the importance of federal dollars, obviously, to match with industry funding as Saskatchewan looks to advance the resource sector. And I believe this is the right ministry for it, but I understand there's a regional energy and resources table specific for critical mineral development. And my understanding is Saskatchewan is not at that table. And I'm curious if you can share why.
The federal government, I've had discussions with Minister Wilkinson about this. Some provinces have signed on, some haven't. We haven't, Alberta hasn't, Quebec hasn't. I think in a nutshell, I can summarize it this way. It's specific to natural resources, and you know, as you know, there's been concerns lately about jurisdiction on natural resources. Our point is very clear in where we stand on that. So I would just say this: there's some concerns. I have concerns about signing on to a very sort of structured format table, having other parties engaged on it as well in an area that Saskatchewan has exclusive jurisdiction over. So No final decision has been made on that yet, but there are definitely concerns about it. I've discussed it with Minister Wilkinson in the past, and I will again.
Okay, and do you anticipate, is there funding that's gonna be left behind, or?
Been, to best of my knowledge, there's been no specific funding earmarked to those tables.
Okay, and you said it was still BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, or pardon me, Alberta, Quebec, and Saskatchewan who had not?
I think that's the case. I think, I stand to be corrected, but I believe those are the ones that haven't
Okay, for
signed
some
on
reason
yet.
I thought there were 9 other provinces that had signed on, but
Alberta has not, and I don't believe Quebec has either.
okay. In terms of critical minerals, when we look at, what Saskatchewan has to develop and has to provide to the world, do we have a globally significant amount of, and I know I'm using the term critical minerals, but I know uranium would be one of those, as I was reminded last night. Thinking particularly of some of the areas of innovation development around rare earth elements and things that the province has really been pursuing. Is it fair to characterize the resources we have here as globally significant?
Yeah, absolutely. No, there's a number of critical minerals, and different countries have different lists of what they consider to be critical minerals. But certainly, you mentioned potash, uranium, we're incredibly significant in that. Helium looks like it's going to be advancing even more. It looks positive. We've got a copper mine going on. So in a very long list of critical minerals, certainly we have I'm sorry, I think the terminology is significance worldwide or something like that. A number of them we do for sure. And then some of them, obviously to a lesser degree. And then again, we know there's some of them there's incidents of, but they're always looking for new discoveries as well.
And for rare earth elements and some of the investments that the province has been making, would that also be globally significant?
Well,
Like potash and uranium, yeah, obviously we're blessed with significant deposits.
Rare earth element side, and again, sorry, there's some crossover here. The Saskatchewan Research Council is doing so much of the work on rare earth, on the development of that. But so that's in Minister Harrison's shop. But I would say there's a great deal of interest right now in rare earth elements worldwide, again, because of geopolitical reasons, right? Most of the world for a long time essentially has relied on China for that now. And again, because of the situation worldwide, many countries are looking for other sources. So that's why the thought is that there's potential now.
Thanks. Am I right in understanding by your comments then that anything related to rare earth elements will be through SRC, and there's not a role for energy and resources, or no responsibility there?
Well, there's the critical minerals strategy course is in our shop, but so much of the work that's being done is in the Sask Research Council on rare earth elements. So if you have a question on that, by all means ask it. If we can't answer it, we'll get it for you.
Just for go forward basis, trying to.
Corey would just like to add to that as well.
Yeah, sorry, it's Corey Hughes. So in addition to Minister's comments, I mean, there is a separation. The SRC is looking at processing of rare earths. The Ministry of Energy Resources is focused on the development of the rare earth resources. So we do have some deposits and certainly some potential in the province, at the relatively early stages, and that's why the critical minerals plan with especially the 2 programs to support exploration we're trying to focus more attention on rare earths and see what the opportunity really is in the province. So
Okay. So then looking at Ministry, you mentioned helium. Is it fair to say that the fact that our helium is environmentally friendly is a selling point for buyers? Is that something you'd characterize the market as?
Corey Hughes. So our helium, we have rich helium resources, and so unlike a lot of jurisdictions, we have dedicated helium wells that are producing and will be producing helium. And our helium is associated with primarily nitrogen, which is not a CO2 greenhouse gas. So there's our helium production, unlike most jurisdictions that are producing helium as a byproduct of natural gas, so it is very clear to say that our helium is a cleaner product than the majority of helium production in the world.
Thanks, Mr. Hughes. How many active helium wells do we have, I guess, as of, I don't know if it'd be end of 2022?
So there's, and this changes frequently lately, there's somewhere between 15, 16, 17, 18 active helium wells right now. There's almost as many of that have been drilled this year but just aren't producing yet. And then there's been, I think it's close to 1,000 dispositions and permits that have been issued, which we think, by all accounts, should increase that number enormously, right? So we think in the relatively near future, that number's going to just keep going up.
Okay, so in terms of the goals of the helium action plan, I believe it's 150 dedicated wells was the goal set out by that project. That quite confident that you're on track to meet that.
We're very optimistic in that industry.
Okay, perfect. I was going to go through some of the other of the new goals for the helium action plan and just ask for progress on them in terms of like I think it's permanent jobs. Generate the annual exports. I think worth more than 500 million. 15 purification and liquefaction facilities. If there's a progress update on all of the actions under that plan.
Okay, so what we have, the target was 10%, and when the plan was released and started, we were well under 1%. Officials are telling me we're now at about 2% worldwide. The jobs, the numbers we don't have, the officials will look at that and try to have an estimate for you. We'll do that as a follow-up as well. And on the processing facilities, there's, the target was 15, there's now 5, and 8 more are planned, and we expect more to be planned after that as well.
Thanks, Minister. I'm looking at the time, just one last question on helium. Looking at the helium royalty rate of 4.25%, understanding that's the same of as Alberta's, and I would anticipate there's a rationale for having the same royalty rate as Alberta. Is having that as an effective rate the best choice for Saskatchewan? Like, is it necessary to have the same royalty rate as Alberta to ensure that we remain competitive, or
So officials are telling me Saskatchewan's had that rate for a number of years. It was Alberta that actually followed suit. A couple of years ago, they set the royalty rate. So I think it's fair to say our folks are comfortable where it's at, and they were the ones that chose to be competitive, if you will.
fun to be first, I guess. And is ours a flat royalty rate, or it's not profit sensitive? The funding increase for the geological survey in this year's budget is, can you help me understand what those funds are for?
I'm going to get the officials to start looking now and get a bit more detail for you, but it's essentially much of the critical mineral strategy is targeted towards exploration, and this helps make exploration easier, makes us more competitive. It essentially, when the companies start doing their work, they're starting out with more data, more information to begin with, so it sort of helps expedite theirs. But I'll get you a bit more detail on specifics of where it's spent.
Corey Hughes. Yeah, so Saskatchewan is widely known internationally as one of the, the premier places for mining investment. A lot of that is because of our geological database. So the work, the money you asked about is really to improve the efficiency of collection and distribution of that data, to maintain our place as a premier destination for mining exploration. So a lot of that data is collected from industry. Industry exploration programs provide data. Our geologists do multiple field camps each year. We have airborne surveys. So there's a lot of sources of data that is collected, and really this is about improving the efficiency of collection and distribution of the data. So.
Through things like the subsurface lab and
Correct.
other, okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I don't, sure.
Seeing there's no more questions, and before we vote off the estimates for the Ministry of Energy and Resources, Minister, if you have any closing remarks you'd like to make.
I'd just like to thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to thank the committee members and all the staff for their time tonight, and thank the critic for respectful questions, and thank you, everyone.
Ms. Young, do you have any remarks you'd like to make?
Yeah, I'd like to thank the minister for the dialogue tonight, as well as all of the officials, present and not present, who work so hard on behalf of the province, not just in preparing for the excitement that is estimates every year, but year-round in the ministry, as well as all the committee staff and my colleagues around the table, especially the chair, for her help tonight. I appreciate you.
Right. We will now proceed to vote on the estimates for the Ministry of Energy and Resources. Vote 23, Energy and Resources, page 41, Central Management and Services, subvote ER01 in the amount of $28,587,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Energy Regulation, subvote ER05 in the amount of $12,593,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Resource Development, subvote ER06 in the amount of $13,699,000. Is that agreed? Carried. Non-appropriated expense adjustment in the amount of $4,060,000. Non-appropriated expense adjustments are non-cash adjustments presented for informational purposes only. No amount is to be voted. And today is May 7th, right? Okay. Energy and Resources, vote 23, $54,879,000. I will now ask a member to move the following resolution. Resolved that there be granted to His Majesty for the 12 months ending March 31st, 2024, the following sums for Energy and Resources in the amount of $54,879,000. Mr. Domitar so moves. Is that agreed? carried. Number 5. Okay, thank you, everyone. We will now begin consideration of Bill number 128, the Mineral Resources Amendment Act 2023, Clause 1, short title. Minister Ryder, if you have any new officials you'd like to introduce, and then make any of your opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Mineral Resources Amendment Act proposes to change the rate of the Saskatchewan Mineral Exploration Tax Credit from 10 to 30%. Increasing the mineral exploration tax credit encourages the exploration and development of Saskatchewan's mineral resources. A key part of the province's growth plan is to increase mining exploration and the value of mining exports. Incentivizing the industry with the tax credits, such as the one proposed here, is but one tool to help us do that. Exploration is an important first stage in the mineral development process and necessary in order to develop new mines. This increase will bring Saskatchewan's mineral exploration tax credit to the highest in Canada, equal to Manitoba at 30%. This proposed change will improve Saskatchewan's competitiveness with other jurisdictions and encourage Saskatchewan residents to invest into junior exploration companies. It will also help exploration companies more easily secure financing. Future mine development born from exploration discoveries is expected to produce significant returns as those projects move forward. The industry has requested an enhancement like this to the SMETC. Given technology advancements, growing populations, and the security of supply concerns, the world has an ever-increasing demand for critical minerals and an ever-increasing demand for sustainable resources that our province can supply. Saskatchewan is home to 23 of the 31 critical minerals found on Canada's critical mineral list. Incentives to industry, like the one proposed here, will help us on our path to growing and diversifying our position as a reliable global supplier of critical minerals as we build on our already world-leading positions in potash and uranium mining. And as we've just seen in the budget, our province is benefiting from our resource revenues. With that, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Minister. I'll open the floor to questions from committee members now and recognize Ms. Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Minister, in your introductory comments, you referenced critical minerals. Is this change specifically targeted at critical minerals? Or am I right in understanding that it'll apply to all mineral exploration in the province?
So the critical minerals will be substantially the bulk of it, but this would apply to, for example, gold and silver. There will be a few others it'll apply to as well.
Potash, uranium, just anything covered off.
Hard rock. This will be hard rock.
Pardon me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Corey and I were just chatting here, and we were thinking of the other incentive. Potash and uranium would apply here as well. So it would, yes.
So looking at the provision for retroactivity, is there a reason this wasn't introduced and passed in the fall?
So this was part of the critical mineral strategy. And so a number of pieces of the critical mineral strategy had to go through the budget process as well.
Given the retroactivity to Jan 1, are there any projects of which the ministry is aware that will be covered off or will benefit from this change?
So the short answer to your question, we're not aware of any companies like that because this program, I'm going to get Corey to just give a bit more detail on how this works with the flow-through shares though. Because this program is effectively, it's already piggybacked onto a federal program. And it's 30% federal, it had been 10% Saskatchewan, now it's going to be 30. So it's combined 60%. But the reason it's retroactive to January 1st is because it goes on the calendar year because of federal income tax rules, right? Like that's where it's done. So I'm just going to get Corey to elaborate a little bit on the flow-through share part of that.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding, like, companies wouldn't even issue the flow-through shares until spring of this year, so we wouldn't be aware of anyone that's actively issuing flow-through shares. And so, as Minister said, that money has to be, so that money is raised, flow-through shares are sold, they have to expend that money in this calendar year, so and it's harmonized with the federal program, so that the information from our program comes from the federal government after the tax year, so.
Thank you. Thanks for that answer. And looking at the shift from 10 to 30%, recognizing it is for tax credits. Is there a maximum amount that could be issued? Like, sorry, I'm not being clear. If a project is 10 million, if it's $10 billion, I guess what's the maximum exposure for?
Just for flow-through shares, I mean, it only benefits junior exploration companies because, any larger company would use the tax benefit themselves. So really, the limit on how much it is how much a junior company can raise and expend in that calendar year. So it tends to fund smaller exploration projects in the province that really drive the exploration industry and the future development. But it's not a, you can't see the $1 billion expenditure is not possible, so.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And then last question, the selection of 30%, is that, the rationale for that is matching the feds?
No, well, there's a bit of rationale around it. Yeah, there, yeah. So Manitoba's at 30. We match Manitoba at the highest percentage in the country, and I think it was, a number of reasons. The ministry did some work in that, but I would just say we want to show how serious we are about this. It's matching the best rate in the country. To your point, I guess the feds are at 30 as well. So we just think it's good news all around.
Thank you. And the rationale for further incentivizing exploration versus, I've seen some calls in industry for increased incentives around manufacturing and processing as opposed to exploration. Could you speak to that choice a little bit?
So I think it's fair to say, we've got 23 of the 31 critical minerals in the country. The question about processing is a good one. But essentially, we've got to start mining them first, right? So in the mining world, this is the first step in it. It's the exploration. And this is targeted very much at the exploration side of it. So at some point down the road, we may look at doing something more on the processing side. I don't know, that'll be a decision to be made in the future. But right now, if we don't want to just say there's incidences of 23 of the 31. We want to talk about how many of them are being mined here.
Thanks, Minister. No further questions.
Seeing no further questions from committee members, we will now move to vote on the clauses. Clause 1, short title, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 2, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. Clause 3, coming into force, is that agreed? Agreed. Carried. His Majesty, by and with the advice and consent of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, enacts as follows: the Mineral Resources Amendment Act 2023. I would ask a member to move that we report Bill number 128, the Mineral Resources Amendment Act 2023, without amendment. Mr. Domitar so moves. Is that agreed? Carried. Minister, any closing remarks on this bill?
No, I just once again like to thank officials from the ministry for all their work, the ones that are still here, Corey and Susanna. Thank committee members, thank the assembly staff, and thank the critic for her questions.
Ms. Young, any comments?
I would echo those thoughts and have a wonderful night, everyone.
We'll now take a 15-minute recess before we move into the Ministry of Environment.